everyone. You're very welcome to this, the latest in our series all about sustainable leadership. This time we'll turn our attention to the importance of self-awareness for leaders and, of course, how we can facilitate the development of self-awareness. Just so everyone's aware, we'll be sharing the slides from this session and a recording of this session and various resources that support this theme electronically after the session. Please ask your questions or drop your comments, perspectives into the webinar chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that as we go through this session. And regardless of your perspective, whether you are a leader, an aspiring leader, or you support leaders, or you're just interested in the topic, think about what these ideas mean for you and maybe for the leaders you look after. It's one of those things that we can be quite conceptual about this, but being able to visualize it in a practical sense. In other words, how would I do that is a really good jumping off point for your questions. And of course, you can join us afterwards, asynchronously in our new online personal development community, WorkLifePsych, which had a soft launch yesterday, but we've got a whole topic dedicated to leadership there, where I'll also be sharing these perspectives, these resources, and we can continue the conversation there. So let's make a start with some introductions. I am Dr. Richard MacKinnon. If you haven't encountered me before, I'm a chartered coaching psychologist and a chartered occupational psychologist. I've been a practitioner psychologist for coming up to 25 years now. I help individuals, teams, and organizations improve and maintain their well-being at work, their productivity at work, and their interpersonal effectiveness at work. And I started this business, WorkLifePsych, 11 years ago this month. Actually, that popped up on my calendar the other day. So it's been 11 years of doing this. I'm delighted to be joined by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Wayne Mullen. Wayne, would you like to say a few words?
Hi, I'm Wayne Mullen. Like Richard, I do a lot of work in organisational consulting, and I'm an organisational psychologist and executive coach. I have known Richard for more years than I can remember, and certainly longer than the 11 years he's been working at WorkLifePsych. So,
thank you for aging us both there. So what are we going to cover in this session? As with all this, the webinars in this series, we'll reiterate what we mean by sustainable leadership, and I'll signpost some additional resources you can have a look at there, including our recent free white paper on the topic. And we're going to start with the real basics. Well, what is this self-awareness concept, and how does growing our self-awareness support what it is that we want to see in organizational leaders? This sustainable attitude, sustainable perspective, and obviously sustainable behavior. And what can we do to help our leaders be more self-aware? Now, there's very little that we're going to talk about here that each of us couldn't take away either. So I'm not going to recommend anything that doesn't work for most people. But if we think about context and the context in which our leaders operate, they're under quite a few demands, dynamic, changing, and sometimes really quite difficult demands. So we want to demonstrate how them knowing themselves better and in more depth can really help them with that. But of course, when we're focused on something like this, we also want to illustrate the potential pitfalls or mistakes that we can make in this space to help you and us avoid them. And we'll close by illustrating what it is that we at WorkLifePsych can do. But really, why it's Wayne and I today, we want to bring to life our own experience as we go through this. What have we done? How has it worked? How does it work when we're supporting leaders in these contexts? So let me make a start by flagging the other events that we've got in this series. Next month, we're going to talk about how coaching supports leadership development. I'll very briefly touch on it in this session, but if you're interested in how coaching can work well, how coaching can be evidence-based and science-based, and how it can make a real contribution to the development of leaders, join us next month when I'm going to be joined by Dr. Rachel Skews, whose PhD was in evaluation of coaching interventions in the workplace. Then the following month, we'll be talking about the role that compassion, self-compassion, and compassion for others can play in leadership. And then we'll close out the year with our final webinar on the leadership topic to bust some of the many, many myths about leadership, some of the misunderstandings, and some of those zombie ideas that keep coming back. No matter what we do to try and get rid of them, they keep coming back. So we want to call them out and explain why they are myths and misunderstandings. All of that can be found on the landing page / sustainable leadership. But I also wanted to draw your attention to an event I'm running next month, at the end of next month, which is not part of this series, but is related. I'm going to be running a masterclass online all about values, the to give people a better understanding of what values are, how we can get clarity on our values and bring them to life in the work that we do. One of the things we'll be talking about today is the role of values when it comes to leaders' self-awareness. I'll share a link to that masterclass in the resources that I share with you afterwards so you can understand more about it, and link to that and reserve a place if that's of interest to you. So what do we mean by sustainable leadership? Let me start the ball rolling. Nearly a year ago, we started to talk about a need to put our thoughts and our experience and our perspective and the science together into something that we could share with others. Collectively, the team saw a lot of the bad practice in leadership development, a lot of the misunderstandings about what leadership is in the contemporary organization, and a needless plethora of models of leadership. What sustainable leadership is not another model. We don't need that. And in fact, recent research has demonstrated they coalesce to an unhelpful degree. They're effectively saying the same things. Rather, this is a philosophy of leadership that we've rooted in contextual behavioral science, an evidence-based approach to understanding behavior in context. And this philosophy emphasizes sustainability. So that's sustainability of a leader's behavior, sustainability of the decisions they make and the impact their decisions have on those around them, the wider organization, and the organization in context, its community. Thinking in terms of those, imagine those concentric circles all the way out to what mark does this organization leave on the world? And to keep things nice and simple, we have three reminders for organizational leaders. They are being sustainable if they're being intentional. They are doing what they do on purpose, not in automatic pilot or not to avoid thoughts and feelings. They're being adaptable in the face of the challenges that come their way. They are being flexible when they encounter things that are difficult externally or internally. And they're being purposeful. They're being guided by something much higher order than annoyance, frustration, or stress, values. They're being guided by values, their values, and the application of organizational values. And if you know anything about contextual behavioral science or psychological flexibility, these sort of echo those three reminders to show up and be present, to let go of mental struggles, and to do more of what matters. So what do we mean by self-awareness? There's a couple of perspectives I'd like to share with you, and then together we're going to unpack this in much, much more detail. But if you think about your own self-awareness, how would you know if you were self-aware, or how would you rate your self-awareness? What would you look for? The first thing that I would say is that this, at a sort of meta level, is an awareness of self in the world. It's an awareness of me in the world, how I show up in the world, the impact I have on the world, and why it is that I am the way I am. But it's not just that, it's to help me guide decisions and behavior with intention. So we want to make sure that awareness is matched by implementation of that awareness or use of that awareness. Awareness without appropriate behavior is really unhelpful. Someone can be aware and not act on that awareness. And that's something we want to call out today as well. And the second point I'd make before we unpack this in a lot more detail is that self-awareness isn't a goal or an end destination. We don't wake up one day and say, that's enough of that for me. I have achieved self-awareness, but rather it ought to be an ongoing area of development, of focus for us. And the reason for that is the world around us changes, we change, the challenges we face will change, and the people in our context will change. Therefore, we need to keep an eye on how self aware we remain and how we're continuing to learn from experience. Wayne, at this point, anything you'd like to throw into those sort of two high level definitions?
Um, no, it's interesting. As you were talking about kind of self-awareness, I was thinking about a couple of things. Like one is how important it is, irrespective of whether we lead people or not. So I think there's something about just our own self-mastery, which I think is critical. And then I was thinking, it's kind of just amusingly, I mean, I've certainly worked with people who see themselves as terribly self-aware and can talk about themselves at length, but maybe aren't quite as good at self-regulation. So probably
Yeah.
something we can talk about as we go through.
Absolutely. They're both necessary.
Mm.
And as I put it when, in workshops with leaders, the awareness without self-regulation is just someone who knows why they're doing what they're doing, regardless of the impact they're having on those around them, and can talk about themselves, but that's not reflected in their behavior. But you can attempt to self-regulate without self-awareness, and that can involve lots of apologizing and effort and trying to keep things in when you don't know where it's coming from in the first place. So they're two sides of the same coin, really. They're both necessary. So let's unpack it in a little bit more detail. This simple model of three aspects to self-awareness echoes a model you'll see in our description of sustainable leadership and one that underpins the leadership development programs that we design and run. At one level, we've got the awareness of the intrapersonal, what's going on inside of me, the awareness of what makes me me. And we're going to look at that in a lot more detail in a moment. So that would be things like motivational factors. What gets me out of bed in the morning? What's important to me in life? How do I derive satisfaction from my work? That would be the intrapersonal. Interpersonal, as it would indicate is what do I know about myself when it comes to dealing with others? My preferences for team working, or am I aware of the impact I have on those around me? And then thirdly, we've got contextual sensitivity. This is something that's super important for leadership, full stop. Um, Being able to show up in the moment and being able to read the room, to keep it nice and simple. Can I tell what's going on in this context? Can I adjust my approach based on what I understand about this context? And the context could be this meeting I'm in. It could be the context for the organization right now. It could be the context for the people I'm working with and maybe the pressure they're under or the change we're going through. But it's the opposite of operating on automatic pilot. I'm really paying attention to now. I'm maintaining a sensitivity to what's actually going on, not maybe what my mind is giving me or the rules that I'm trying to follow in life. And as this simple diagram illustrates, these are they influence each other, they support each other, and it's not enough to just have one of these. It's not enough to develop one of these. As our model that we keep coming back to illustrates, we need to know ourselves. We need to focus how we get along with others, and we need to pay attention to what's happening in the moment to be as effective as possible. So what we'd like to do is sort of unpack these and give you a few more details, and then Wayne and I illustrate how we've done this work with leaders and the kind of results that we've seen before looping back and talking about the impact that the contribution this makes to leadership, sustainable leadership in the workplace. So let's talk about this stuff within us, the intrapersonal. I want to start by saying any of the lists we share with you are in no way finite. There are so many things that can contribute to our intrapersonal factors and our intrapersonal self-awareness. But maybe I'll start the ball rolling with something that is maybe top of everyone's list when they think about self-awareness in the workplace, but it often stops there as well. Is someone aware of their strengths and their development areas, or strengths and weaknesses, however people want to put it in the workplace? This is important for a number of reasons. And we can get that awareness through feedback, if it's effective feedback and discussion of our development trajectory and how we might need to improve. But that's not the end of our interpersonal self-awareness. That's one facet of it. And this is one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this today. There's far more to it. And how we can find out about these, as I said, feedback to learn more about our strengths and development areas, but personal values. What's important to me in life, and what are the personal qualities I want to bring to life? As someone who puts values at the core of the work I do with individuals in coaching and with teams, I've lost count of the number of times I've asked people, do you know what your values are? And they've said, no idea. Or they've kind of responded negatively to the word values, full stop, because there's a lot of cynicism when it comes to values in the workplace. So unearthing, clarifying your values is an incredibly useful activity to learn more about who you are as a person. And then, of course, you can take them forward and start to use them to guide your behavior. But they're almost like a fundamental building block of understanding who you are and how you want to be in the world. Wayne, what about personality? This is something we've both done a lot of over the years, help people understand more about their personality. How do you address this with leaders?
Well, I sometimes use instruments. So I think some of the psychometric instruments are helpful in just in terms of giving you a framework and a language around personality. I don't think you can sum up anybody's personality in one instrument. I think what they do is they just give you some insights into some of the building blocks of personality, and I think that can be really helpful. Uh, in terms of what I always say is, if you know how you're hardwired, it's easier to be flexible. Like if I know I'm not good at detail, then it's easier for me to just flex and go, well, that's going to take me a lot more energy. Or if I know, if I know that I tend to be, I don't know, very spontaneous, then I know it just takes me a little bit more effort to be more planful. In situations where I might need that, and that might make me more effective. Or I'm leading people who might have more of a need for structure than I do. So that's the sort of framing I give to personality. It's like if you know what you're like, if you know how you're hardwired, then it's easier to be flexible.
And that is a great way of summarizing values, strengths, and development areas as well. I know
Mm.
why this is uncomfortable for me because it's going against my values. I know why this is taking longer or why I love doing this. Personality is also your behavioral preferences, how I like to be in situ. We can also look to what, yeah, as I said earlier, what gets us out of bed, what are my sources of motivation, and the opposite, those things that maybe drain my enthusiasm, self-concept and how I talk to myself about myself, or the stories about myself that I buy into. In leadership development, it's really important for us to understand the beliefs we hold about ourselves that might be holding us back or leading us astray. If those beliefs are a little bit out of kilter, a little bit unrealistic, or indeed self-defeating. And then day to day, understanding how we think about the world. And maybe, almost certainly, if we have a mind, we have some cognitive biases, we have some perspectives, expectations, some distortions or unhelpful thinking habits. That could be something as simple as a tendency to catastrophize when something goes wrong, or an unhelpful level of positivity in the face of difficulties. And then something, Wayne, you and I have talked about quite a bit, an awareness of our skills and our confidence, and maybe where competence and confidence align, and when they don't. It's really important to know that and spot that and get that through feedback. I see a lot of overconfidence
Mm.
being a cause for leadership issues. What about you? I'm gonna imagine the answer is yes, but
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's interesting because I think the first point and the last point on that slide are kind of related. But I always say to people, it's like, look for data. If someone says like I'm not good at this and whatever, it's like what's the evidence that you have? What's the data that you have? And I think that's the same for things like overconfidence. And I think the point there also about kind of biases and perspectives and cognitive distortions. We all come into workplaces with our own frames of references. We all go into any situation with our frames of references, and that's how we read. That's how we read the world. And I think one of the important things in leadership is to have a sense of your own kind of frames of reference, because they really narrow our focus. And what we want to do is to try and broaden our sort of environmental awareness. And so we have to let go of some of those things, or sometimes just hold kind of multiple frames of reference, particularly when we're trying to understand where other people are coming from.
Absolutely. We can really hold ourselves back by only seeing the world from one perspective. And it takes effort, but it really pays off to imagine the world from different perspectives. This is situations
Mm.
from different perspectives. So, a flavor of so many of the maybe starting points that leaders and each of us could take when trying to understand more about who am I as an individual. Next, we've got who am I when it comes to interacting with others? Obviously, our goal here is that we'd have lots of smiling people, just like him on screen. But that's not always the case in the workplace. And a blind spot I find leaders who are technically able and very bright is that they are unaware of the impact that they're having on those around them for numerous reasons. The root cause could be anything, but interpersonally, being aware of when I say it like this, or when I don't respond, or when I interrupt, or when I dominate, or when I stay silent, this is what it does to the people around me. This is so important for leaders because of the role modeling, the scene setting they do, the way that others look to them for guidance, and how they contribute so strongly to the culture of an organization. So ensuring that leaders understand how am I coming across and what is it that my behavior and decisions do to other people is a cornerstone of this. Wayne, when it comes to helping leaders understand more about the getting along with others and the impact on others, what's been your experience?
Um, it, I think things like feedback is important. I mean, one of the things I always try to do in one-to-ones, for example, with people is just to say at the end of that, like, what feedback do you have for me? And I think that dialogue is helpful. That as a manager, it's not just me giving feedback. That I'm asking for that, and it kind of normalizes feedback. So I think some of those things are really interesting. Um, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about a situation very early in my career where my team um, invited me out for a drink, and they thought I was really upset. And it was to do with the fact that I was doing very detailed planning work, and it's not my preference. It's like a different level of energy for me. And so I was very withdrawn while I was doing it, and they experienced me in a different way. And I had no idea, but I've learned that since, and I've had to say that to people, like, if I'm very, very quiet, it's probably because I'm doing very detailed, methodical work, and it just takes a different kind of energy. But I had no idea that people were experiencing me so differently that they thought that I was upset, and I wouldn't have had that if people hadn't told me. That's what you need, is someone to say, "What's this is how we see you right now. This is what's going on for me," or whatever. Similarly, I had somebody who started working for me, and she would make copious notes in our team meetings. And after a couple of weeks, I said, again, what feedback do you have for me? And she said, I don't know when you talk whether it's an idea or you want me to do something. And so she needed a different level of specificity from me in terms of, these are my ideas, but actually what I want you to do is this. And so again, it was just good, feedback. She had a need for kind of clarity and precision, which was different from mine. So, yeah.
A great example, and one that also illustrates one of the other points there about curiosity. Actually, just being even interested in how you're coming across and interested in other people's perspectives. So, curiosity being the opposite of just pure judgment or an absence of caring what other people think and what their perspectives are like. I've worked with leaders who are tripping themselves up because their preferences for how they do their work are very inflexible and they're enforcing them on others. And that means that they're not open to flexibility in how things are done or when they're done or where they're done. And we're seeing a lot of that, I would argue, at the moment with inflexible demands on people to say, be in an office when that is not having an impact on their work. And also the one thing that we all differ on as human beings, but still social creatures, is our differing needs for connection, how much and how deep we need those connections, those relationships to be, because it can really help us understand any fleeting experience of disconnection or loneliness, which is very bad for us, objectively speaking, for our well being, but also for our relationships, and how we might, to come back to my earlier point, do things like call meetings or demand people come to see us personally because all we're looking for is a bit of connection, when in fact we could find that in another way in our lives. And one of my secret hypotheses is that so many leaders right now are asking people to come into the workplace because that's what helps them feel like leaders, when they can see people around them rather than learning how to lead asynchronously or from a distance. The interpersonal behaviors that we're talking about here are, of course, as Wayne has illustrated, supported by the intrapersonal. If I know about me, I can then use that to understand more about you. That's really what it boils down to. And the inherent flexibility that's required. One of our earlier sessions in this series was about why leaders need to be or benefit from higher psychological flexibility. Part of that is about understanding who you are and knowing you don't have to be at the mercy of stories about yourself or your thoughts and emotions. And part of it is about doing the stuff that really matters. And that's flexing your behavior based on what's actually happening rather than following those inflexible mental rules. Which brings us to this third part, contextual sensitivity, the here and now. And there's so many different things that contribute to this. Wayne, you and I had a conversation asynchronously over email the other day about mental time travel. This
Mm.
is something that is at the very heart of being psychologically flexible. Can I show up in the moment? Can I be present? And can I notice when my mind is taking me to the future or the past? That can have an impact on how I interact with others. If I'm going off in my head, catastrophizing, I'm not listening to my team in the room, and I'm feeling emotions that derive from a future that hasn't happened yet. And maybe I'll take it out on those people around me. But at the very least, I'll look distant and disconnected and not paying attention. So much of leadership is showing up and showing up in a way that suits the context that we're actually in. When showing up is difficult when leaders are doing a difficult, demanding role. How have you covered off the being present with them in the past?
It, it's a good question. In some of the leadership programs I run, one of the first things we start with is context. So, and one of those questions is like, what does the organization need of me right now? And what do the people that I lead need of me right now? And and it's a it's a question that I encourage people to ask frequently. You know, to sort of to take time out, like balcony time, where we go, actually, what does the organisation need of me right now? And then that enables me to be more intentional, to really think about where I'm spending my time. You know, being present, focusing on the needs of other people, focusing on the needs of the business, because we are, most of us are just deluged with stuff. We just have a lot of work and we have different communication channels and we're trying to stay on top of all of those things. And so it's very easy to go into what Richard calls autopilot. You know, you just do stuff because we're just so used to doing it. But I think having that time, ideally every day, just to be able to say, what does the organization need of me right now? You know, what is the most valuable thing I can do today, or this week, or this month? And then asking yourself the same question about the people that are either your peers or your stakeholders, or that you lead, or all of that. So,
Absolutely. And there's a big part of this supports our interpersonal. success. If we know what we're feeling, we can then work on adapting our behavior to meet the needs of the context and not have it all contingent on our emotions. It's very difficult to work with people who are emotionally volatile, and you never know which version of them you're going to get today, or you're going to be on the receiving end of whatever they're feeling. And we know emotions aren't always rooted in what's happening now. It could be because of what happened last week or the distant past, or as I said, an imagined future. So, key to leadership contextual sensitivity is to portray and to behave what's required in that. And it could be, as I've pointed out here, intentional use of emotion, as in, this is serious, so I'm going to portray a serious behavior and serious emotional expression. This is lighthearted, and I want to signal that to other people. When people are hard to read, that can also be disconcerting, too much of a poker face. So there's a big part of that contextual sensitivity to be really aware of what's showing up inside of me, how am I showing up in this moment, and what's going to be a useful way for me to signal to others what's important in this moment, seeing as so many people will take their cue from the leader. So hopefully we can see how these three facets, these three elements of self-awareness can be really important, because one of the things that I've noticed coming up in my coaching practice over the last at least decade is that they can often represent the questions that leaders or aspiring leaders ask themselves. When it's the intrapersonal, it's often the really fundamentals. Like, do I have what it takes to be a leader? When it's the interpersonal, it's, can I lead this group of people? Or indeed, what do this group of people think of me as a leader? And when it comes to, both the context, but also the interpersonal, there can be the frustration that my strengths don't seem to work with these people in this context. Why is this so difficult? And I've heard that from leaders taking people through change situations a lot. From the leader's perspective, it's a straight line from A to B. But change doesn't really work that way. And if they're not paying attention to now, and if they're not emphasizing the interpersonal aspects, their approach is not going to land well with those around them. And of course, if we know what makes us tick and we're paying attention to now, we can answer questions about how can I navigate this moment? Or indeed, this helps me understand why I've got some fear or apprehension about this. I would argue a huge part of self awareness for us all is maintaining our capacity to ask questions of ourselves rather than keep deciding we know why something is the way it is, or shying away from the questions, full stop. Because asking the questions and then exploring that helps us learn more about ourselves, the situation, the people around us. And all good coaching and development is based on questions. Would you agree, Wayne?
100%.
And that is what we call a leading question. So let's talk a little bit about what we can do to increase this sustainable leadership that we're looking for. Why is it that self-awareness contributes to this? Why are we talking about it today? Remembering sustainable leadership is intentional leadership. It's leadership with an eye, not just surviving today or getting through this week, because that kind of very, very close event horizon can result in unsustainable behaviors, behaviors that make people ill or don't contribute to organizational success. If we know about ourselves, Wayne gave the perfect example earlier. If we know what's tough for us, if we know what we don't enjoy, we can ensure we're using our finite resources of time, attention, and energy to good effect. We don't pretend all work is equal. We don't pretend all situations are equally pleasurable or easy. We're able to know that it's going to take us longer or it's going to take more energy and so on. And as a result of that, if we know this, then we know how we're going to recharge ourselves effectively and sustainably in a way that we can keep doing. And that informs how we're going to look after ourselves. We, and in a previous session, talked about the role of ongoing sustainable self care and sustainable coping responses to the challenges that we face. This is a major theme in the leadership coaching that I do, where people are worn out and ill, or are leaning into coping strategies to deal with the demands of their job that they really can't keep using because at some point they're going to tip over into either burnout or a threat to their physical well-being. That self-knowledge, that knowledge of others, it also means that we know when to put our hand up and ask for help, or indeed, to come back to Wayne's example earlier, to know when actually I could really surround myself with the people who are good at this. It doesn't all have to sit with me. I can't be the expert on everything. Um, those things we've touched on already. Wayne, to loop back to you, knowing how to put it simply, use others or use the skills and strengths of others. It sounds like something really impactful you've worked on with the leaders you've supported.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if there's a couple of things we can accept. One is that most of us are not complete leaders. If we have strengths in certain areas, if we're somebody that's very strong operationally, we might not be somebody that is as strong in things like vision and direction. Or we might be good at both. But so as Richard said, when you can surround yourself or draw upon people who are better at those things than you are, then that is where we sort of get completeness in leadership. And we sort of, and it's a view really which says that leadership, particularly in teams, is a sort of process that moves around. So, I know that there are things that are probably my strength, and I certainly know that there are things, which are not. I mean, I always love working with people who are very good at sort of dotting I's and crossing T's, because I think that's where quality comes from. But as I said, people experience me in a different way if I have to do very detailed, methodical work. Um, so I think recognizing that we're not complete leaders, I think is very important. And I think the other thing, and I say this all the time to people, is like the idea that you're going to be on top of everything is a fantasy. And the sooner you accept that, and the less likely you are to get into things like burnout, etc. I mean, is just recognizing that we just live it, like, working lives where you know we're not going to be on top of everything all of the time. It's just not possible. So
Mm.
and that's kind of okay, you know.
I think it has to be because otherwise we're trying to do it all.
Yeah.
And there's a key word jumping out here, and I've got it on the slide: prioritization.
Mm.
Intentionality, sustainability says these things are super important. It's not that the other things aren't important, but something has to be more important, and therefore that's going to get my attention. Therefore, that's what we're going to focus on. It's not to disrespect or ignore other things, but we can't do everything. And that means that leaders also need to know when to lean into their strengths and when they need to leverage other people's strengths and when they need to not, I mean, a lot of the time, action-oriented people like to, tick the box next to tasks and get things done. But sustainable leadership means we may have to dedicate more time to this, and we won't be able to say it's done for a while longer because we need to do it properly or we need to give more thought to this. So it's not just doing, it's doing with intent.
And I think it ties back to some of the early slides around self-awareness. I mean, certainly in my coaching practice, and also thinking about my own patterns, we do sometimes have patterns that have very early roots, and so we can put unnecessary pressure on us. I hate letting people down. I hate being late for anything. I mean, and I put extraordinary pressure on myself because of those things. And equally, I've coached people who have found it incredibly difficult to say no, and that really has come from family systems,
Mm.
and that need to please and not let people down, and or I always have to be kind, etc. So I think going back to that self-awareness stuff is sometimes just understanding your own patterns and where they come from, and why we sometimes put too much pressure on ourselves in some of these situations.
Absolutely. And it's a big theme that comes up when a leader is stepping into a new role, potentially in a new organization. that this is a whole new context. So potentially the stuff that worked really well for you in your last role may not work well here. And to have the awareness that you may need to change your approach. And that doesn't mean past you was no good. It was great in context, but present you needs to navigate this in a different way. So being open to trying new approaches as well. Let's talk about what we can do to help leaders. Our whole next session is about leadership coaching. I'm not going to dwell on that, but it provides an opportunity to be really open and vulnerable and explore new ways of doing things. We've talked about feedback. We both need to seek it and encourage people to give us feedback. And that's why I've mentioned psychological flexibility here. Doing the difficult things, doing what matters includes having difficult conversations and asking people about how we're impacting those around us and being open to doing something with that feedback. I guess that's important as well, not just getting the feedback, but acting on it. In the new year, I'm going to be running a masterclass on how to be more reflective, but it's super important that moving away from just getting through the week, just getting through the month, it includes looking back so that leaders can learn from the time gone by. How did this week go? How can next week be even better? How did I contribute to our success? What do I need to do more of, less of, etc. Not relying on our memory for this stuff, but being able to look back at a journal, at notes, at something that we've captured so that we can say, look at the arc of my development over time, rather than it's Friday at 6 p.m. I'm getting out of here. We need to ensure that leaders get the feedback in a structured way, that it's part of how we do things in an organization, and that we at least give them the opportunity to engage in structured leadership development where exploration of self-awareness is a part of that. And I make the case in the organizations I work with that their leadership frameworks, be they competencies or leadership values, however they want to put that together, that actually self-awareness is part of that. We need to put it on a par with all of the other things we want from our leaders so it gets the airtime so that people get feedback about it. And as Wayne mentioned earlier, we can give them models of personality, of values, of motivation to help them conceptualize the differences between them and others. A very, very basic developmental stage we're all supposed to go through is realizing that what's in my head is not in your head. And yet, leaders trip themselves up all the time by not even attempting to understand those differences. It doesn't mean things must change as a result of that, but knowing that there are those interpersonal differences. This summarizes the things that we'll do in programs to help people better understand themselves and how they're impacting those around them. There's no silver bullet, there's no one thing that works better than anything else, but I would maybe summarize it all by being open to asking questions about ourselves and being open to asking questions of others about ourselves so that we can mesh those perspectives and importantly do something about the answers that we get. So, what are the things, and this is what I want ringing in people's ears as we wrap up, what are the things that we want to avoid when it comes to self-awareness in leaders? Number one is the thing that I encounter all the time, simply putting leaders in a box or allowing them to put themselves in a box. It could be a personality box. Oh, I'm red, so I can't do that, would be one example of that. Or I'm high potential, therefore everything I do is correct. We want to ensure that leaders have a nuanced and detailed understanding of themselves. We also want to make sure that leaders get feedback that is not there to make themselves feel good, that we're not avoiding difficult conversations about their behavior or other attributes. And we also want to make sure that we're not only giving corrective feedback, that we're acknowledging strengths that people are bringing or acknowledging when they're acting out of their comfort zone, out of necessity, because the context demands that. We're gradually moving away from this, thankfully, but saving the feedback up for a 1 year download at a leader is not going to help anyone. In fact, it's going to seem like more of a punishment than anything else. So normalizing feedback conversations as a constant so that it's not saved up. And making sure that leadership development programs don't only focus on technical skills. And I've seen that happen over the years. We need to ensure that giving people the time and space to explore who they are as a person so that they can build themselves into leadership, that is as valued as, understanding how to read financial reports or make strategic decisions. These are really important, the technical and the interpersonal together. Sorry, Wayne, you were going to say something.
No, yeah, just I mean, we sometimes talk about sort of oxygen feedback as the sort of oxygen for leaders. I think that there is an organisational reality, and it's a tough one to tackle. But um, when you're in a leadership position, and particularly the further up organisations you go, the less likely you are to hear the truth. And it's interesting. Even when you do anonymous 360, etc., there is a reluctance for people to sometimes, I think, to tell the truth. And I think one of the things I've experienced as an executive coach is when you have a good relationship with your client, you are able to say, look, this is how I'm experiencing you, or this is what I'm seeing about you, and I wonder what that means for people who work for you. And sometimes it's the only time they've ever heard that somebody's actually said, look, right now this is what I'm seeing. I know how I'm experiencing it. What's that like for people around you? And so it's an ongoing challenge, I think, to ensure that leaders get the right feedback at the right time, because there is a sort of natural fear in the system, because there's a hierarchy. And so even when I say when I've said to people, what feedback do you have for me? I know that I'm not going to get 100% honest feedback, but at least if I can start the conversation, then it can be helpful. But I think it is a challenge in organizations about, really getting good quality feedback to leaders.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it starts the ball rolling for so many other things. I don't want anyone to leave this session with the impression that we think this stuff is easy. We're saying it's necessary, and they're two different things. But which brings me to the final point in all of this. What is it that we do and can do to help organizations with this? We regularly, as we've indicated, coach leaders or aspiring leaders stepping into leadership to help them build this self-awareness and this flexibility of behavior. We also run structured training courses on aspects of this. Feedback is a great example of that because provision of feedback, asking for feedback, acting on feedback, these are skills that we can teach. And of course, we design and run end-to-end development programs for leaders that cover more so the things we've been talking about today, that self-awareness, that behavioral flexibility, that sustainability of behavior. We'd love to talk to you if you're interested in learning any more about any of this. And you can find out more via that sustainable leadership link. You can email me at that email address if you've got follow-up questions. I will be sending you all of the resources from today. And please don't forget about WorkLifePsych, our online personal development community. I'll be sending you a link to that in the document as well. If there's any questions at this point, we'd love to answer them. I know we've run a little bit over time today, which we don't normally do. So maybe this is a me and Wayne combination thing. But if there's anything you'd like to ask us, please drop it in to the chat or indeed send an email afterwards. Wayne, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up or why people are writing their questions?
No, I mean, I always think it's nice to have a bit of space and a moment to just to be able to talk about these things and reflect on them. So.
Oh, great question from Victoria. Do you find you often have to link the commercial benefits to leaders of doing personal work in this way? Nearly always, but it is about, in my experience, uh, looking at what is expected of leaders in that context, in that organizational context, and working back from that and saying, this is the stuff that helps people get the best out of their teams. This is the stuff that helps people attain their goals and targets. But also, this is the stuff that prevents burnout, which, aside from the human cost, is extremely expensive for organizations. And this is the stuff that contributes to lower senior turnover, which, as Wayne can attest, is very expensive. It's time consuming and challenging to find excellent senior people. I frame it in those terms. Is there anything I've missed, Wayne, in terms of the commercial benefits?
No, I mean it made me smile because I had a meeting with the CEO of a business this morning, and it was very much this like trying to help him to see that leadership development isn't, it's not an HR thing that we want to do some soft work. It's like this is about helping you to deliver, deliver on your strategy. I mean, it's not a but it the conversation was about really helping him locate it. Like, where does this sit in all of these things I have to do? But yeah, because it's I think it's sometimes seen as just it's what HR do is whatever, but it's not. I mean, it's an integral part of how you deliver to your shareholders and stakeholders.
Mm. I've got a comment in from Faye. Thanks, Wayne and Richard. Really appreciated your insights and guidance. Like the way this session was structured too. Lots of things to reflect on and a few quotes to take with me to a new head teachers network meeting this afternoon. That's a whole different kind of leadership, isn't it? But it's leadership. So thank you for that, Faye. Really appreciate that. I think that there's a point about leadership development that often gets neglected, and we push against it all the time, which is neglect of context. There is no one leadership development program. It's about leadership in context. So I always ask the question, well, what do you need of your leaders here? Not what you've read in that book you bought at the airport or in that YouTube video you saw. I say this as a YouTuber. But what do you need, or what do you say you need of them? And that's what we can build a leadership development program on. So it starts with context. And I think that's something you said earlier, Wayne.
Yeah.
So we have run over, but thank you for the questions and the comments. It doesn't seem like it's been a huge problem, but I don't want to go much further. We did promise we'd wrap up on time. So thank you so much. I'll be in touch with the resources, and hopefully we can continue the conversation asynchronously on our platform. Nice to see some returning names appear on the participant list. And thank you for your interaction and contributions. We'll hopefully see you next time, but bye-bye for now.